one of the things, some of the things I was saying is like that this is like a transformative experience, not just for the youth, right? There's something that is happening for the parents in this, and that there's something about letting go, that process of letting go, and like not in one moment, right? It's not just like, hey, okay, off you go, done, but like what is that healthy held process of them leaving the nest, and it starts when they get that, what do you say, like that waking up, right? When they wake up into their own, wait a second, I'm not just an extension of my parents, and then what starts to like emerge from that field, and so yeah, it's not just one night, and it's not even just these 2 years. This is like the initiation of that process. Thank you, everybody, for all the reflections, and it's going to continue. And this is why the parent program is an important part of this program. It's because it's in partnership that, in a way, we are your partners in this, and you are our partners in this. And because it, like to be very cliche, it takes a village, right? So there's certain things that the parents cannot do for their children. It's a counter what your role is. You should be caring for them and making sure they're safe, and so there's some things that we need the uncles and aunties to come in and do.
Amen. Shall I continue?
Yeah, please.
How does that sound to y'all?
Good.
Sound good?
It makes me grieve for the children who don't get that.
Yeah.
Makes me grieve for my adolescent self.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been going through a lot of that.
Yeah, how many feel that? What Prem just said, like, I didn't get that, and I'm hurting a little bit because of that. Yeah.
I got it late.
Thank God you got it.
Yeah.
It's still not too late. I've been thinking about that lately. I kept saying to myself last year, I need nature.
Adult.
Adult.
That's what Julia's call it.
Adults.
Well, so I'd like to give a little bit of context, and in some ways, this what I want to share is an extension of what you were all just sharing. How Itamar was sort of wrapping up that conversation, and on one level, this is a conversation that I want to share that's primarily targeted to those who are new at this circle. So welcome, first-year parents in particular. And I think I'd like to end the evening by everyone sharing their names and who they are, and we'll become one level closer together. And for those of you who heard some version of this conversation last year, I hope you find what's alive and most relevant for you now, because you are on a journey, as we were talking about. So what is B'nature? B'nature was first called the Nature Rite of Passage B'nai Mitzvah program. And then one of the girls in the program, I think in the second year, called it B'nature. I was like, that's brilliant. B'nai, children. Nature of nature. Children of nature. B'nature. That was a miraculous name for the program. We adopted it immediately.
And Ba means in, right? So
Yeah, it's also
nature.
in. So it's also in nature. Exactly. B'nature, in nature. B'nai, children of nature. Yeah,
I love a good play on words.
Mitzvah.
Yeah, it's all that. It's Heblish. Really, really sweet Heblish. And the impulse of B'nature is this sense of supporting a rite of passage, a soul-centric, nature-based rite of passage experience. And in some ways, I juxtapose that to what Judaism offers traditionally through our synagogues, what we call bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, b mitzvah, which is beautiful, learning the Hebrew letters, learning the Hebrew language, learning the Torah, learning the prayers, Hebrew Torah prayer. And then there's, cultural context and community building and things that synagogues do that are beautiful. But I think the ceremony that we do through a synagogue is not necessarily always a rite of passage. It can be, I've seen it, but it's not always. As I say, I'd more appropriately call it a rite of competence. Like, we are learning cultural competency in learning the language, learning the prayers, and learning how to read from the Torah and other pieces too. So that ceremony is a powerful rite of competence. You stand up and you perform your competency in front of the community. And you're seen in a certain light, and you're uplifted as a Jewish adult, which I actually think on one level is completely absurd. Because you don't get in front of the community and at 13 years old become an adult. But I understand, when the bar mitzvah was originally embodied, adolescence was very different. It was probably a lot shorter. There wasn't even necessarily such a thing as adolescence. You jumped from being a child to being an adult. You went from being, a kid in the family to then having like serious responsibilities, often going into family creation and child rearing at a relatively very young age. Now we don't raise families till we're in our late 20s, and for many of us, like me, in our 40s. And so now we have this thing called adolescence, which is often an extended period of time where we're betwixt and between, like Jacob, somewhere between Yitzhak and Laban, And I think this is the impulse for B'nature is about your children. It's about supporting your children to not just have competency, but to embody adolescence in order to be prepared for the journey towards adulthood, to begin to truly take responsibility for themselves from the inside out. Now, my belief is that will support your children to become healthy adults one day, putting them on that pathway. I will also say that I deeply believe that this is one of, if not the most important healing for our planet. And the fire agrees. I was blown away when I heard the Prime Minister of the UK, Boris Johnson, recently say, in the context of talking about the UK's climate change policy and how strongly he's pushing the modernized world to adopt very serious climate change measures, massive reductions in CO2 outputs, methane outputs, adopting renewable technologies, whether it's solar, wind. He's pushing nuclear really hard. We can fall on different sides of that, but really working very hard to reduce climate change impact. And one of his central tropes these days, and he's saying that humanity is in a state of adolescence, which is demonstrated by our proclivity for taking and not tending, for thinking of ourselves before we think of others, but by putting ourselves at the center of the universe. That is the hallmark of adolescence. And of course it's that way. As a child in a family system, you are at the center. You're breastfed by your mother, you're fed, you're coddled, you're nurtured, you're held. You're held in the center. You're held in a center of, ideally, in a center of love and protection. And then in adolescence, you start to do that for yourself. You put yourself in the center. You start to learn how to love yourself and to hold yourself and protect yourself. But Boris Johnson said, but if we don't go beyond adolescence, then what are we? We're just takers on planet Earth. And he says, now it must be the end of humanity's adolescence. And of course, that means individual people within humanity have to go beyond adolescence. We have to grow up and become care-tending adults. Well, that's a lot of individuals for humanity to make that move. But that's Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of the UK, who's like a capitalist par excellence, But he understands at a very deep level that if we don't make that move, humanity, the Earth will probably be fine, ultimately. But humanity will not be fine. Humanity will perish on this Earth. And so I actually feel like the work of B'nai Nature, which is, working at a small scale, and one day I hope it actually goes way beyond what we're doing here. I want to continue doing it here, but I want to scale it beyond, because I actually feel the truth of this, that to heal the planet, we must return to a time when we grow people beyond their adolescence. And B'nai Nature is really about meeting adolescence to take the next step in that journey. So how do we do that? What is the recipe? And what is the partnership that we're reaching out to you for in this journey of encountering adolescence and coming of age in a certain way? Well, first of all, this is a mentorship program. This isn't an educational program. We're not teaching here. Your kids will learn a lot of things. But we're not doing like what we once called drag and brag environmental education. We're not taking kids to the forest and saying, this is a huckleberry plant, you can eat the berries. This is a mugwort, it'll make your dreams come true. This is pennyroyal, we can make tea out of it. Or we encounter it differently. We do the opposite. We ask a lot of questions. We follow their curiosity. If one of your children meets a huckleberry bush, they're like, "What's this? This is amazing!" And they start pulling the berries off. Like, ho! Don't start eating berries until you know what you're eating. We might start asking some questions. What do you notice about this plant? And we'll start mentoring. So they'll learn, but it's not a teaching program. It's really a mentorship program. We want to know, where are they at? Where, in their development? Where are they in that story? Are they still in that kind of self-centered, kind of conniving place like Jacob? Or are they closer on the edge where they're ready to jump through the portal and put their head on a stone and dream the dream? Where are they at? We're watching that. The approach that we have is marrying, in some ways, the Judaism and nature. Nature is a context for us to remember our simple and profound humanity. In the natural world, we return to very basic things like, how do you tend a fire? How do you find water? How do you build a shelter? How do you find food in the forest? Really basic survival things. Why? We're not survivalists. It's not because we think the system's going to collapse and your kids are going to have to fend for themselves in the wild. We're not teaching them on that level anyways. But there's a deep belief, if they begin to relate to the natural world in those ways, it unlocks basic humanity, that relationship that we have with the natural world. In Hebrew, the word for human being is Adam, and the word for the earth is Adamah. It's the same word, because it's the same thing. We are that, But in modernity, we forgot that, basically. We're very disconnected for a whole variety of reasons. But we live in a very disconnected state, so we're kind of far from our humanity. And I'm not suggesting we all return to living in the forest and just feeding off the land, but I do think it's absolutely necessary that we have that relationship. And so they get that at this ripe time. Relationship to be able to tend a fire. If they got caught out, they could do that. They could light a fire to stay warm by. And they will have that skill. And that actually changes your nervous system on a deep, unconscious, basal brain kind of place, in that survival place. Knowing you can bake a fire, find water, and get some food in the wild, even if you don't need to ever in your life, it actually changes your relationship to being a human being on planet Earth. It changes who you are and makes you more relaxed and connected to yourself. Another piece that we do very consciously, and Itamar beautifully was alluding to this, right now your children are having, for some, their first rite of passage with darkness. We take your kids to the edge over and over again in different ways. Tonight it's with darkness. For some, it's sitting in a circle and sharing your heart and doing authentic sharing. For some, it's a real edge. For some, it's being alone. For some, it's being cold. For some, it's being wet. The rain tomorrow that's coming is a blessing. We are so happy it's on its way. It is a medicine. So we get a chance tomorrow to have a rite of passage of rain and being wet. And then there's the rite of passage into tradition. Hebrew words, Hebrew prayers, Jewish values. So we weave these things together. Learning hand skills, bringing them closer to that relationship between the origins of material that we can create things out of. Again, that brings you closer into relationship to just the very basic foundation of life, which is the earth itself. And then there's partnership with y'all. When B'nai was first created, we didn't have a parent program. And I wrote an article, co-authored an article with Stephen Green about taking parents along on the journey. In that article, which you can read if you want to, it describes this phenomenon where the first 2 years of this program, a fair number of the parents actually pulled their kids out. And I couldn't tell you exactly why, but what we surmised was that the parents were unconsciously disrupting the program because they didn't get the kind of initiatory experiences we were offering. And either they were afraid or somehow they were resistant because of their own inner experience. And we realized that we needed to take the parents on the journey too, for two reasons. One, to have allyship with you, so you knew what we were doing, so you wouldn't freak out. But also so we could, in some much smaller scale, take you on the journey too. Because as many of you spoke tonight, you're also going through your own rite of passage, and we need to consciously encounter you in that, and help you see that, and also build a community of parents where you can see each other in that. How many of you feel like that is something that's happening for you? Especially second years, I imagine first years are like, I'm just getting here, but I'm interested. So, how many of you, when Itamar was talking about being out in the darkness, alone tonight, how many of you were like, felt a little bit of like, maybe a little bit of fear, anxiety, or like, what? Like, did anyone have that a little bit? All right. A lot? Great. Thank you. Thank you for being honest.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, like, I'll be honest and say it goes even farther than that my head just goes straight to, like, he's going to hit a branch, knock his head, be bleeding, but he's okay because he's happy.
Nice. Well, tonight, they're out in the dark alone, and they're with a group and they're having fun, and like, it's a sweet beginning. But tomorrow night, different. Tomorrow night we're gonna put what we now call eye coverings on them, and we're gonna beat a drum in the middle of the forest, and they're gonna walk blindfolded through the forest alone, all the way through the forest. And they're going to hit a tree. They're going to fall down. And they might get scratched.
And wet.
And it's going to be raining tomorrow night. And they're going to get cold. And they're going to get soaked,
Some will be barefoot.
He survived last year to where they did it last year.
And so when I shared that story, like at the beginning of B'nai, the first parent program, we used to do the drum, we called it the drum stock. We used to do it on the first night. And at this circle, I told the parents what was happening while this meeting was happening. And one of the mothers leapt across the fire at me and said, and like really got really triggered. And I'm hearing you on some smaller level being triggered a little bit. And I want to really honor that. The parent's job is to protect the children. Our job is to take them to the edge. So we offer your children edge experiences within the zone of proximal development, which is like a fancy pedagogical way of saying, in a way that doesn't go into the red zone where they're triggered out of their mind and too scared, but also in a way that isn't like, this is boring, stop wasting my time, We scare them just enough that they're really, really excited. And we do it really early on in the program because we send them a signal. We're like, we mean business. We're not wasting your time. And we're going to take you through some really exciting, crazy stuff. And what that does from our perspective is we take them through experiences that they at first would perceive as impossible because they've never done them before, but they seem totally insane. And then they do them and they're like, I did that. And all of a sudden the universe changes. Their self-perception of what's possible expands. Their sense of independence and self-reliance grows. And I will tell you that, whether you like it or not, it also helps them understand that they can become more independent, which also changes their relationship to you over time. And so, again, we ask for your allyship in that. That when they're having experiences where they're growing themselves as individuals, they may or may not want to share that with you. And I ask you to honor, what they're ready to share with you and not ready to share with you. And if you're really frustrated by that, talk to each other. Here's a community of support. Look around the fire. You're all here together. Or call Itamar and complain. But allow them to have their experience. Because this is their journey, And I hear them coming.
All together, the first and second year student?
Yeah.
He said no. He said yes.
Oh.
No, they're not.
They're not.
So I want to wrap it up because I feel like the energy wants to move. And I want to pause and ask if there's any questions. And then I want to go into us all standing up and standing closer to the fire and sharing our names. And then one layer deeper, building community. But are there any questions? And let's constrain ourselves to questions, not like our own kind of ideas and insights and teachings, but any questions that are arising that want to be asked right now. And if anyone wants to, I would there's some wood right behind the bench there. If people bring 3 or 4 pieces of wood, just feed this fire and we can.
It's okay to help 10 get fired.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, please.
That was a direct
I was asking.
ask from the fire, the soul fire tender.
Tonight I'm the fire tender.
Where is the sandwich?
Zoe, could you tell us a little bit more about some of the other EDGE experiences that are part of the arc of the program? I don't always get that from my kid.
Yeah, totally. So there's lots of different things we do. On Sundays, it's daytime, but we'll do, one core routine that we encounter over and over and again in increasing amounts of time is just being alone in the forest, being alone in nature. And so we call it Hit Bodadut, making yourself alone. It's one of our core routines. And that can be a real EDGE experience. How much time, and that will grow over time so that eventually they have enough experience they can do a whole night by themselves. Other EDGE experiences are, taking away their sight and following a thread through the forest. That's literally a string that's through the forest, through an obstacle course, things like that. Other edges are like encountering wild edible medicinal foods and learning about them and eating them. For some, that's really edgy. And then using a knife to craft and getting close to fire and burning wood to make useful items like spoons and eventually a mezuzah. And then eventually learning how to tend their own fire and then doing that all night long, all night long alone. That's a serious edge. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
No, go ahead.
In the second year, are there things they should do at home from a practice perspective to prepare for that experience?
It's ideal if you can support them to continue learning how to tend fire. It's a competency. And the fire, why fire? I meant to talk about that. Why do we center fire in nature? Anyone have a sense of that? Why would we do that?
Just like a powerful force in nature.
It is a powerful force in nature. It's maybe the most powerful force in nature. I mean, one could argue water is just as powerful, but yeah. But fire in particular is like the major destructive force in nature. And also fire, in my mind, is like the metaphor for, you know, for sexuality. Like it's like when the hormones come on in adolescence, which is what's going on with your children, you know, give or take, all that fire emerges. And with that fire comes power. With that fire comes passion. And with that fire comes the ability to, like, literally create. And the flip side of that is to destroy. Like, there's a lot of harm that can come with our sexuality. I mean, and I'm obviously... and so, like, learning how to encounter something, and this is another big edge experience, is learning how to encounter something so powerful and dangerous and become intimate with it. And we don't necessarily make explicit the connection between fire and sexuality. Sometimes it comes up in groups, then we'll start to explore it, but sometimes we don't. But I think the lessons is in there as they learn how to tend their own fire, eventually all night by themselves in a forest, where if their fire gets out of control, like what Rowan discovered, they literally could burn the place down in some seasons more so than others. But there's something that happens about being able to tend your own inner fire. And that's not just sexuality, that's part of it, but it's also the inner fire of your spirit, you know, your directionality in life, your life force. And so there's something about tending something physically that supports the tending something within. And that's a big edge.
There's also the emotional component, right? It's like anger, potential.
Yeah.
Anger can be, you know, powerful and important and tended to skillfully or not. Right?
Totally.
All of the emotions, really.
Yeah.
Just remember that as those emotions awaken,
Yeah.
that goes into everything. There were just so many.
I think my kid's edge is actually just being in the group.
That's what I was going to say. Is
Yeah.
just like
It's hard for
yeah.
a kid.
Totally. So for some it's solitude, for some it's the exact opposite. So and that's it. Like, and we have like a profiling approach where we're gonna like take all these different aspects, you know, leadership in a group, ability to be in nature alone, knowledge about the Hebrew calendar. Like we track the Hebrew calendar. It's like the main thing is like really get in touch with the seasons, literally being outside, tracking the Hebrew calendar, the holidays, things in the Torah, the stories in the Torah, and how they connect to what's happening in the weather cycle, what's happening in the vegetation cycle, like connecting like the Hebrew, Jewish tradition cycles with the natural cycles. You know, how to work with a knife, how to work with fire, and many other skills, and we track them. And so for some, we're like, oh wow, like they're a natural born leader, and they're already this far developed in their leadership. Let's put them on the next level by putting them in charge of something as a leader. Or someone else is like really socially anxious, you know, great. So we need to be aware of that and find like the introductions to group dynamics that really support them and to slowly grow them through the levels that we can perceive. So we're consciously mentoring them in those ways. I want to turn to Itamar and say, is there anything that you're feeling like, ooh, I really want to hear this, and you have it to share?